hall was enormous. It was so large that the sound of footsteps disappeared before they could echo. The walls curved upward like the inside of a shell, and the seats rose in wide circles, filled with beings of every shape and color. Some had 4 arms, some had no eyes, some breathed through organs on their backs. They all had one thing in common. They were powerful, and they knew it. When Junyo walked through the lower entrance of the Galactic Conclave chamber and took his seat at the small human delegation table near the back. The table was small because the space given to Earth was small. It had always been small. 31 years of membership and humanity still sat at the edge of the room like a guest who had not been fully invited. He placed his papers on the table, straightened them once, and looked up at the raised central platform where the vote would be read. Beside him sat Yuna. She had a data pad open in her hands, and she was reading something on it, calm and quiet, the same way she always was. 2 seats down sat Do-hwan. He was not reading anything. He was just sitting. His hands were flat on the table, and his eyes were watching the central platform with no emotion that anyone could name. The vote was about the Orin Belt. For 40 years, humans had worked in the Orin Belt, and they had sent ships out to that cold stretch of space when no other species wanted it. They had built stations there, dug into dead rock, seeded the atmosphere of 3 small moons with enough chemistry to make them breathable. It was hard work done over a long time by people who believed the effort was worth something. The Conclave had decided it was worth something too. Specifically, it was worth giving to the Vreth Dominion. The ruling was read by the Conclave speaker, a tall gray being with long fingers who spoke in the common trade language. The words were clean and official. The Orin Belt and all its registered territories were to be transferred to Vreth control within 18 standard months. Earth's colonial presence would be accommodated during the transition. It was said the way someone says the weather will be cold. As a fact, with no feeling behind it. Junho stood. He raised his hand in the formal way and waited for acknowledgement, and the speaker gave it to him, though the pause before doing so was noticeable. He said that Earth opposed the ruling. He said that the work done in the Orin Belt was human work, paid for with human years and human lives. He said that the legal basis of the transfer was built on economic pressure and not on law. He spoke clearly and without anger. Every word was correct. From the upper tier, where the Valorian delegation sat in their silver seats, a sound came down. She leaned toward his aide and said something, leaned toward his aide and said something. The aide turned on the open mic by mistake. The words came through the hall speakers for just a moment before being cut off, long enough for everyone to hear. He had said that humans protest the way small animals bare their teeth. Junho heard it. The chamber heard it. He did not change his face, and he finished his statement, thanked the speaker, and sat down. Yuna had already opened a secondary filing and was preparing a counter-petition. She had written most of it the night before because she had expected the vote to go this way. She submitted it through the proper channel without looking up. The system accepted it, assigned it a case number, and placed it in the review queue. It would sit there for a long time. They both knew that. Do-hwan reached into his jacket. He took out a small data pad, the kind with a plain black cover and no markings. He pressed his thumb to the screen, opened a file, and typed 4 words. Then he locked the screen and put it back in his pocket. Nobody asked him what he had written. Nobody was watching him closely enough to care. That evening, the 3 of them sat in the small common room assigned to the Earth delegation. It had one window that looked out over the docking level of the station. Below, supply ships moved in slow lines. One of them had Earth markings on the side, white and blue, catching the light of the star outside. Yuna put a cup of tea on the table in front of Junho and sat across from him. She did not say that it was going to be fine. She did not say that they would fight back through legal channels. They had been doing that for years. She just sat there, which was sometimes the most honest thing a person could do. Do-Wan stood at the window. He watched the Earthship below as it finished its docking procedure and its cargo ramp came down. On Earth, the news of the vote reached every city within the hour. There were no riots. There was no panic in the streets. People watched their screens and read the words and sat with what they felt for a while. Then, quietly, something started moving. Government channels opened. Emergency sessions were called. Leaders who disagreed on almost everything found that they agreed on this, and the vote passed on a Thursday. By Saturday, every major government on Earth and all 7 of its colonies had signed a unified response declaration. The last time that had happened was during the Kalon Plague, when survival had made the decision easy. This was different. This was not survival. This was something older and colder. This was the feeling of being told, in front of everyone, that you do not matter. On the station, an Avreth diplomat passed through the corridor behind the Earth delegation table as Junho was gathering his things. The diplomat was tall and scaled and walked with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He stopped beside Junho and said that Earth should teach its people to accept their place in the galaxy. He said it the way someone gives advice to a child. Junho looked at the window. The Earthship was still below. He said they were working on it. The Vreth diplomat moved on without another word. Junho watched the ship until it finished loading, sealed its ramp, and pulled away from the dock. Then he picked up his bag and walked out of the room. 5 years passed. To the rest of the galaxy, it felt like nothing. 5 years was a short time for species that lived 3 centuries or more. The Vreth Dominion moved into the Orin belt, set up their mining towers, and began pulling ore from the ground that human hands had broken open. The conclave moved on to other business. Other votes, other disputes, other species arguing over rocks in space. Earth became a footnote. A small, quiet planet that had made noise once and then gone silent. The Conclave Intelligence Office filed one report on humanity every 6 months. The reports were short. They said the same thing each time. Earth appeared to be in a period of internal consolidation. No military movements detected. No expansion activity. No diplomatic outreach to other species. Economically stable. Politically calm. Nothing of interest. The officer who wrote those reports was considered very thorough. He was also completely wrong. In a research facility on Ganymede, one of Jupiter's moons, a woman named Mireille had not taken a full day off in 3 years. Her office had no windows. She preferred it that way. Windows meant sky, and sky meant distraction, and she did not have time for distraction. The walls of her workspace were covered in calculations, some written on actual paper because she thought better with a pen in her hand. She was building something that had never existed before. It started with a problem. Every cloaking technology known in the galaxy worked by bending light or absorbing energy signals. The Vreth used signal absorption. The Thari used light refraction. All of them had the same weakness. They disrupted the natural sensor patterns of space in ways that careful equipment could detect, like a hole in fabric. Something was missing, even if you could not see the thing that was there. Mirai approached the problem differently. She did not ask how to hide a ship. She asked how the human brain ignored things. She studied the neuroscience of selective attention, the way a mind decided what was background and what was not. Hero called it ash veil, when the first full called it ash veil. When the first full test ran on a scout vessel in deep space, the ship sat inside a ring of 17 sensor arrays, military grade, the best Earth had. Every single one of them reported empty space. Mirai watched the readings for a long time. Now then she wrote in her log that the calibration needed minor adjustment and went back to work. While Mirai worked on Ganymede, a man named Seojun was doing something else entirely. He had been given command of Earth's restructured deep fleet 18 months after the Orin vote, and he had spent every day since then making it into something the galaxy had never planned for. He was not a loud man. He did not give speeches at ceremonies. He walked the length of every ship personally, spoke to engineers and gunners and medical staff by name, and asked questions that made people think he was just curious. He was not just curious. He was building a picture in his mind and filling in every detail. Earth's old military had been designed for defense, patrol ships, border monitoring, peacekeeping near the colonies. It was the military of a species that had been told, politely and firmly, that it should not need more than that. Seojin rebuilt it from the inside. He studied the warfare doctrines of every major species in the conclave. He learned how the Vreth fought, how the Valorians moved their fleets, how the Keth Collective used swarm tactics. He learned their strengths, and he spent long nights thinking about what sat underneath every strength. Every strength had a shape. Every shape had a gap. He built 7 combat divisions, each one trained and equipped to fight in a way that a different alien doctrine had never expected to face. Not copies, encounters. He also built something else. In unclaimed stretches of dead space, away from any mapped route, his crews established 17 resupply stations, small, dark, no beacon signals, stocked with fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and food. They were invisible on every chart the conclave held. If a fleet ever needed to move fast and far without being tracked, it would not run out of anything. A woman named Heron ran the office that made all of this possible without anyone noticing. Her title did not appear in any document the conclave had access to. Her office did not appear on any organizational chart that Earth filed with the Interstellar Registry. She was very good at making things exist without anyone being able to point at them. She had spent 4 years building an intelligence network that reached into the staff levels of 11 conclave species, not through threats or theft, but through patience, relationships, and an extremely detailed understanding of what people needed and when. She knew things. She knew them early. That was her entire job. Earth also did something that surprised the 3 smaller species it approached. The Thari, the Olivi, and the Senec were all conclave members who had been pushed to the edges of galactic politics the same way humanity had. Earth came to them quietly, without announcement, and offered real things. Technology that worked, medical systems, faster ship drives. In return, it asked for loyalty and access to certain stretches of space. All 3 agreed within a year. None of them told the conclave. On the last day of the 5th year, Seojin stood in a private docking bay on Earth's lunar station. There were no cameras, no guests. The new lead ship of the deep fleet sat in front of him, long and dark, its hull smooth and undecorated. He had named it the Dohwa, after a flowering tree that bloomed in early spring and was gone before you expected it to be. He walked the full length of it with his hands behind his back. He looked at every panel, every joint, every line of the hull. When he reached the front of the ship, he stopped and put one hand flat against the metal. It was cold. He nodded once. Back in her office, Heron received a transmission confirming that the Vreth Dominion had begun full production operations in the Orin belt. She read it twice. She closed it. She opened a new file, typed the words "Contingency Dawn" at the top, and began to write. The Vreth mining operation in the Orin belt ran smoothly. It had been running smoothly for 5 years. 40 extraction towers spread across 3 moons, pulling ore from the ground in steady shifts. Supply ships came and went on a regular schedule. The operation was large and profitable and completely unremarkable. The crews had settled into routine. Routine made people comfortable. Comfortable people stopped paying close attention. That was the morning the sensors showed nothing. Then 14 ships appeared from nothing at all. They did not arrive from a jump point. They did not slow down from a visible approach vector. One moment, the space around the mining operation was empty, and the next moment, it was not. 14 warships sat in a wide ring around the entire perimeter of the Vreth operation, positioned with a precision that suggested they had been placed there by someone who had studied the layout for a long time. Their hulls were dark. Their running lights were low. They did not fire a single shot. On the bridge of the lead ship, the Dohwa, Seojun stood with his hands behind his back and looked at the mining operation on the main display. He had seen pictures of it many times. It looked exactly the way he had expected it to look. He turned his head slightly and nodded to the communications officer. Nari was 26 years old and had been on the Dohwa for 2 years. She was good at her job in the way that people are good at things when they care about them deeply and practice constantly. She opened the channel to the Vreth operation frequency, verified the connection was stable, and looked at Seojun. He looked at Junho. Junho was sitting in a chair near the back of the bridge. He had not stood yet. He was looking at the display the same way he had once looked at an Earth ship through a window on the Conclave station, quiet and still, and carrying something behind his eyes that was not quite anger and not quite sadness, but lived in the space between them. When Seojun nodded at him, he stood up slowly, straightened his jacket, and walked to the front of the bridge. He did not clear his throat. He did not pause for effect. He spoke in the common trade language, clearly and at a normal pace, on the same voice he had used in the conclave chamber 6 years ago, when a room full of powerful beings had laughed at him. He said that all Vreth personnel had 72 hours to leave the Orin belt. He said that Earth was withdrawing from the Galactic Conclave, effective from that moment. He said that any vessel remaining in the Orin belt after the deadline would be treated as a hostile force operating inside sovereign human territory. Oh, he said thank you, and closed the channel before anyone on the Vreth side had time to respond. The silence on the bridge lasted about 4 seconds. Then, every system on every Vreth station in the belt lit up at once. The Vreth operations commander was a broad, heavy being named in his language by a sound most humans could not make. He had commanded mining operations for 20 years. He had never been in a situation he did not understand. He stood in front of his display screens and looked at 14 ship signatures that had appeared from nowhere, and he felt, for the first time in his adult life, that he did not understand the situation he was in. He sent an emergency transmission to the Vreth Dominion Home Command. Then he sent one to the Galactic Conclave. Then he sent one to the Vreth Dominion Home Command again, because the first one did not feel like enough. The Conclave received both transmissions within minutes. The emergency session that followed was the loudest the chamber had been in years. Representatives who had not spoken about Earth in half a decade were suddenly speaking about Earth at great length and volume. The Valorian delegation called for immediate sanctions. The Keth Collective proposed a formal censure. Several species who had voted to take the Orin belt from humanity in the first place now argued passionately that humanity was behaving recklessly and without respect for galactic order. None of them called the humans to talk. They talked about the humans instead. That was a habit they had not thought to break. The Vreth Dominion called their own session, and it was calmer and more dangerous. They reviewed the sensor logs from the mining operation. 14 ships from nowhere. No approach. No signal before arrival. Their best analysts looked at the data for 6 hours and could not explain the entry. They forwarded the logs to their military division. The military division looked at the logs and made a decision. They would send a fleet, not a small one. They built the number up carefully, thinking about what it would take to make a clear statement, something the rest of the conclave could watch and understand. They settled on 40 vessels. It was the largest single deployment the Vreth Dominion had authorized in a century. They broadcast the fleet's departure on the open conclave channel, with full ship counts and an arrival estimate. It was a public act, a message to every species watching. This is what happens when you push back against the Dominion. The broadcast reached the Dowa 40 minutes later. Nari handed the report to Seojin without comment. He read the numbers. 40 ships. He read the broadcast text. He read the arrival estimate. Then he turned and looked at Junho, who was still near the front of the bridge, looking at the display. Junho turned when he felt Seojin looking at him. Seojin held up the report. Yunyo read it. He read the number 40. He looked at it for a moment, the way a person looks at something they have been waiting a long time to see. Then, for the first time in the story of all of this, Junho smiled. It was not a large smile. It did not take over his whole face. It just appeared at the corner of his mouth and stayed there quietly. He said that they sent 40. His voice did not sound afraid. It did not sound angry. It sounded like a man who had spent 6 years being very patient and had just been told that the patience was going to be worth it. Outside the viewports of the Dowa, the stars were still. The Orin belt was quiet. The mining towers stood dark and empty now, because the Vreth crews had started evacuating within an hour of Junho's message. Even they, in all their confidence, had recognized something in the tone of his voice, something they did not have a word for in their language, and they left anyway, which was the right decision. It was possibly the only right decision anyone in the Vreth Dominion made during that entire period of time. The Vreth fleet came in fast and in formation. 40 ships, moving in 3 wide columns, their hulls painted in the deep red that the Dominion used for war deployments. They had traveled 3 days to reach the Orin belt, and they had spent those 3 days preparing. Weapons charged, targeting systems calibrated, crew briefed and ready, and they expected to find 14 human ships waiting nervously at the edge of the belt, possibly already retreating. They found 14 human ships sitting exactly where they had been 3 days ago. Still, unmoving. As if they had not considered leaving worth their time. The Vreth fleet commander broadcast a single warning. He told the human vessels to power down their weapons, move away from the belt, and wait for boarding instructions. It was the kind of message that assumed compliance before it was sent. He had given messages like it before, and they had always worked. Species backed down when the numbers were clearly against them. That was how the galaxy functioned. Numbers were a language everyone spoke. The human ships did not respond. He gave them 60 seconds. The 60 seconds passed. He ordered the fleet to advance and engage. The Vreth columns moved in, closing the distance with the human formation in a standard approach. Targeting locks engaged across all 40 vessels. Gunners settled into position. It was the moment before a battle that always felt like a breath being held. Then the human ships vanished. Not one of them. All 14. In the same instant, between one sensor sweep and the next, every human vessel disappeared from every screen in the Vreth fleet. 40 ships suddenly had nothing to point at. The formation held for about 4 seconds on training and discipline alone, and then it began to fracture because the crew members doing the jobs that required a target no longer had one. Commanders shouted at their sensor operators. Sensor operators shouted back that there was nothing there. The space where 14 warships had been sitting showed empty. Clean readings. Background radiation. Stars. Nothing else. The first impact came from the left side of the second column. A Vreth destroyer took a full strike on its rear engine section and spun hard off its axis. Nobody had seen anything approach it. There was no visible ship. There was no energy trail. There was just the destroyer, intact one moment, and then tumbling the next, with its engine section dark and leaking drive plasma into space. Before the column could react, 2 more ships in the same formation reported impact. One lost its forward weapons array. One took damage to its bridge section and went quiet on the command channel. The Vreth fleet did something that well-trained soldiers do when they do not understand what is happening. They fired at the places where the impacts had come from. They put a great deal of energy into that space. It did not hit anything. The human ships had already moved. They were somewhere else, invisible. And the Vreth fleet was shooting at empty space while its own formation was breaking apart around it. And Dohwan watched the tactical display from his station on the Dowa and moved his hands across the controls with the calm of someone doing a task they had rehearsed until it was no longer exciting. He had studied Vreth fleet doctrine for 2 years. He knew how their columns communicated, how their commanders delegated targeting authority, how long it took their chain of command to adapt to an unexpected change. He knew the gaps. He moved ships into them the way water moves into cracks in stone, as not with force, but with understanding of where the space was. The pincer came from both sides of the first column at once. 6 human ships, still cloaked, closed from opposite angles, and hit the column's center vessels in a sequence timed to 4-second intervals. It was a tactic borrowed from the Vreth's own military manual, something they had used against the Oluvai 40 years ago. Except the Vreth had never fought it from the receiving side, and they had never fought it while they could not see the ships doing it. 6 Vreth vessels were disabled in under 4 minutes. 2 of them collided with each other, trying to turn away from impacts they could not predict. On Ganymede, in her windowless office, Mirai sat in front of a screen that showed a live feed from the belt. She had a cup of coffee in her hand that had gone cold an hour ago. She had not noticed. She was watching the tactical numbers update in real time. Had calculated it would do. She did not had calculated it would do. She did not smile. She just watched with the focused attention of someone checking their work. Then Seojin's voice came through the command channel. He said one word. The word was cleared. Mirai set down her cold coffee and pulled up a secondary display. The gravitational lance had been tested once on a dead moon the size of a small city. That moon no longer existed. Mirai had spent 14 months after the test adjusting the yield parameters, tightening the compression radius, making it something surgical instead of something catastrophic. It was ready. It had been ready for 8 months. It had been waiting for a moment that justified it. Seojin selected the largest ship in the Vreth fleet, a dreadnought, heavy and slow, only sitting at the back of the formation where command vessels usually stayed. He gave the order. The lance fired from a ship the Vreth could not see. There was no visible beam. There was no explosion in the conventional sense. The dreadnought simply compressed. In the span of about 2 seconds, a ship that was 800 meters long became something the size of a large stone, and then it was gone entirely. No debris field, no fire, just an absence where something enormous had been. Every Vreth ship in the belt saw it on their screens, every single one of them. The conclave relay feeds were carrying the engagement live to 100 watching species. The chamber had gone quiet in a way it almost never did. The Valorian representative leaned toward his aide and asked in a low voice whether what he had just seen was real. The aide did not answer because the aide did not know what to say. In the belt, the Vreth fleet had stopped moving. 27 ships still functional, and 13 gone or drifting. The formation that had left home port 3 days ago with confidence and red paint and 40 hulls no longer existed in any meaningful sense. Seojin opened the channel. He said that they had all seen enough. He said that Earth had seen enough as well. He told the remaining Vreth vessels to leave. He did not shout it. He did not add anything to it. It was a short sentence delivered in a flat, even voice, the voice of someone closing a door. The Vreth fleet left. All 27 remaining ships turned and began their exit. Vessels that had not retreated in 2 centuries of warfare turned away from a belt they had held for 5 years and did not look back. The withdrawal took 11 minutes. When the last ship cleared the belt boundary, the space around the Orin belt was quiet. The engagement had lasted 47 minutes from the first impact to the last retreating ship. Mireille watched the final Vreth vessel disappear from the feed. She looked at her numbers one more time. Everything had performed within acceptable range. She picked up her cold coffee, took a sip, and made a face at the temperature. Then she opened her log and wrote 1 line. Yield was acceptable. She closed the log and started thinking about the next problem. The conclave had not been this quiet in living memory, not the quiet of a pause between arguments, not the quiet before a vote. This was something different, and this was the quiet of a room full of powerful beings who had just watched something happen that none of their models or assumptions had prepared them for. They sat in their tiered seats and looked at their screens and talked in low voices to the people beside them, and every conversation was a version of the same question. How long had humanity been building that? And the harder question underneath it, the one nobody wanted to say out loud, what else had they built that no one had seen yet? And the Vreth Dominion filed a formal complaint with the Conclave the same day their fleet returned. The complaint accused Earth of unprovoked aggression, illegal weapons development, and violation of Conclave territorial agreements. It was a long document, carefully written, full of legal language. Nobody acted on it. That was new. 6 years ago, the same document would have produced a swift and unanimous response. Now the chamber looked at it, and looked at each other, and did not move quickly in any direction. Even the species that had voted to take the Orin belt from humanity in the first place found reasons to be busy with other matters. 2 months after the battle, Earth sent a ship to the Conclave station. It was not a small diplomatic transport. It was a full-sized vessel, long and dark, and it docked at a berth that Earth had not used in years because Earth had not needed a large berth in years. The crew that came off it was not large, but it was composed in the way of people who know exactly why they are somewhere and are not nervous about it. Junho walked through the main corridor of the conclave station, and people moved out of his way. Not because he was physically intimidating. He was not a large man. They moved because of the thing he carried around him now, the weight of having been right in a room where everyone else had been wrong, and having said nothing about it until the moment said everything for him. Heron walked behind him and slightly to the left. She wore no insignia and carried nothing in her hands. Several of the representatives who passed her glanced twice, trying to place her face in their records. They could not. That was not an accident. Yuna was already on the station. She had arrived 3 days earlier and spent those days in quiet meetings with representatives from smaller species, the ones who had also been pushed to the edges of the chamber for years, the ones who had watched the Orin belt vote and felt something familiar in it. She had not made any demands in those meetings. She had listened. She had asked questions. By the time Junho arrived, she had a very clear picture of who in the conclave could be trusted to understand what was coming and who could not. Junho was given the floor on the 4th day. He stood at the same podium he had stood at 6 years ago. The same curved walls rose around him, the same tiered seats filled with the same kinds of beings. The Valorian representative was in his same silver seat in the upper tier. He was not making any sounds that resembled laughter. Junho did not spend time on history. He did not remind the chamber what had been done to Earth's claim on the Orin belt, or how the vote had gone, or what had been said about small animals baring their teeth. Everyone in the room remembered. No vote, no coalition, and no economic. No vote, no coalition, and no economic arrangement could change that. Any future territorial questions involving humanity would be negotiated directly with Earth, not decided in a chamber and handed down. Trade between Earth and conclave species would be rebuilt on equal terms. Now, if any species did not find those terms acceptable, there would be no trade. The Thari, the Oluvai, and the Senek were named as protected peoples under Earth's umbrella. Any military action taken against them would be answered the same way military action against Earth would be answered. He paused there for a moment and let the chamber think about what they had watched 47 minutes of 2 months ago. He also said that Earth was not interested in ruling anyone. It was not interested in empire. It was not coming to the conclave to take what others had built the way others had once taken what humanity had built. It was coming to say that the old arrangement, the one where Earth sat at the small table near the back and spoke carefully and was ignored anyway, was finished. Something new could exist in its place if the galaxy chose that. But the choice had terms now. He stepped back from the podium before anyone could respond. He walked back to his seat, and the chamber did not laugh. What followed was 18 months of careful, exhausting, and occasionally desperate political maneuvering by species that had grown comfortable with the old order. Coalitions formed to resist the accord. Heron's network, the one she had been building for years out of patience and relationships and deep knowledge of what people needed, made sure that every coalition found itself unable to hold together, not through threats, through information and the right people learning the right things at the right time. The coalitions dissolved one by one, like knots coming loose in warm water. The Vreth Dominion signed the accord first. It surprised everyone except Heron, who had known it was coming for 3 weeks. The internal reasoning that leaked from their government afterward said that they had looked at what humanity had built while no one was watching, and they had asked themselves a simple question. If humans built that in 5 years of silence, what were they building now, with every reason in the galaxy to keep going? They decided they did not want to find out the hard way. They signed. After the Vreth signed, the rest came faster. Species that had been waiting to see which way the current moved began to move with it. By the end of the 18th month, 214 species had put their mark on the Orin Accord. It was not unanimous. It did not need to be. On the day the last major signatory confirmed, Una was standing at the viewport of Earth's new orbital station. It was a large viewport, floor to ceiling, and it looked out over the docking level, where a row of conclave vessels sat in berths that had been assigned to them under the new framework. Their hulls were painted in the colors of a dozen different species. They were there because Earth had said they could be, under conditions Earth had set, in a station Earth had built. Yunyo came and stood beside her. He was older than he had been 6 years ago. They both were. He looked out at the ships for a while without speaking. Una asked him what he was thinking about. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was thinking about the Valorian, the one who had laughed. She asked, "What about him?" Junho kept looking at the ships. He said he wondered if the Valorian remembered the day he did it. He said he wondered if that was the thing the Valorian thought about now, or in quiet moments. Una said nothing. She looked out at the docked ships and the stars beyond them, and the long dark that stretched past all of it. There was nothing that needed to be added to what Junho had said. Some things were complete on their own. Far across the galaxy, in a quiet room in the Valorian home system, an aging representative sat alone and did not sleep. The room was comfortable. His life was comfortable. Nothing had been taken from him, and yet he sat in the dark and thought about a human diplomat standing at a viewport on a station, watching a ship below and saying in a calm and unhurried voice that they were working on it. He understood now what that meant. He had understood for some time. That was the part that kept him awake.